Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder, the place where we decode the sometimes confusing world of corporate filings. Today we're diving into a proxy statement from Gartner, a company that sells advice and insights to businesses. Now, proxy statements might sound dull, but trust me, they're like a sneak peek behind the curtain, revealing what's happening with the company's leadership and how they plan to run things. Let's see if their plans are insightful or just plain wrong. This year, there are a few key things to look out for, including the election of directors, an advisory vote on executive pay, and the ratification of their accounting firm. Seems standard enough, but what could be juicy is figuring out how Gartner is actually performing. This document is basically Gartner's invitation to their annual meeting for stockholders, which is like a town hall for companies. It outlines what's on the agenda, who the board members are, how much executives are paid, and other important things that stockholders need to know to make informed decisions about voting. It's all happening virtually this year, so no need to book a flight. One thing that will be voted on is the election of 11 people to Gartner's board of directors. The board is basically like the company's governing body. They help make big decisions about where the company goes. Management is recommending to vote for all of them, and then stockholders can agree or disagree. Let's meet some of the nominees. You have people like Peter Bisson, who used to be at McKinsey & Company. There's also Richard Bressler, who's the president, COO, and CFO of iHeartMedia. It's a mix of experience from consulting and private equity to media and technology. Digging in a bit more, it's worth noting that Richard Bressler is an audit committee financial expert. This basically means that he's qualified to understand the financial statements. Karen Dykstra is the lead independent director. Basically, she has power to call special board meetings if she wants to, and is in charge when the chairman isn't there. You can see this matrix of what the board thinks is important to have, such as industry experience, technology, and public company boards. Almost everyone is strong in leadership, strategic planning, and operations. Seems like they know what they're doing. Gartner uses a majority vote standard, meaning a nominee needs more for votes than Argan S test votes to be elected as a director. If someone doesn't get enough votes, they're expected to offer their resignation. This makes sure that stockholders actually have a say in who's on the board. Let's talk about how much the non-management directors get paid. There's an annual retainer fee of $90,000, but an additional $50,000 for the lead independent director, and an additional $150,000 for a non-executive chairman of the board. Also, committee chairs get an extra fee, plus they get $240,000 in restricted stock units, which vest after a year. Looking at the director compensation table, Richard Bressler received about $360,000 in 2024. And Sutherland Fuchs received about 364 filings related to his stock ownership, E4000s related to his stock ownership. The report also talks about corporate governance highlights, such as having a lead independent director, majority voting for directors, and things like that. Their board is led by Eugene Hall, who is both the CEO and chairman, which combines the two roles. The board regularly reviews succession plans for the CEO and his direct reports, which is something that many companies don't talk about in public and is good to hear. They also have a code of ethics and a code of conduct for everyone, so if you think something isn't right, there are steps that you can take to address that, which is another good thing. But finally, the company says that directors and executive officers are not allowed to do things like hedging their stock, which is good. Basically, it is to avoid gambling on the company doing poorly. Time to check out the executive officers. Eugene Hall is the chairman of the board and chief executive officer. He has been in charge for a very long time and he got paid a lot of money. They also appointed Yvonne Genovese as the Executive Vice President, Research and Advisory in February 2025. It sounds like they are mixing the leadership team up a bit. The important section, the Compensation Discussion and Analysis, or CD&A. It explains how and why executives are paid what they are. For Gartner, the magic word is contract value, or CV, which is the dollar value of all their subscription contracts. They say it's the single most important performance metric, and that if CV grows, it leads to profit. A huge 94% of the CEO's pay is tied to incentives and stock. So if Gartner does well, the top guy does well. The same is true for 86% of the others. Gartner also says what they don't do, such as no single trigger on change in control, meaning that executives do not get paid a lot if the company changes hands, but they stay, and no hedging or pledging, meaning that these top guys cannot bet on the stock tanking, which is always a good thing. The stockholders seem to be pretty happy with how things are going, as 92% of the votes cast approved the executive compensation last year. When it comes to figuring out how much to pay their executives, Gartner looks at what other companies are doing, specifically a peer group of 17 other companies that are similar in size and industry. This year, some examples included Adobe, Aon, Autodesk, Intuit, and Moody's. Also, companies that are no longer public were removed, like Splunk and VMware. The executive compensation is comprised of base salary, short-term incentive compensation, and long-term incentive compensation. For example, let's look at base salaries. The company gave all the executives a raise of about 3%. The current CEO's salary remains the same at about $963,000. Craig Safian got bumped up to almost $690,000. These are some pretty good salaries to begin with. The annual bonuses are tied to EBITDA and revenue, so if the company makes more money, then they get bigger bonuses. The numbers are FX neutral. So if they hit the target that was in the plan, they get 100% of their bonus. Otherwise, they get either 0 or 200% depending on if they fail to pass the minimum or get max performance. The CEO target bonus could have been $2.4 million. The other named executives could have gotten a $1.1 to $1.3 could have been $2.14 million. And did they make it? The report mentions actual revenue ended up being $633 billion versus a target of $610 to $74 billion. The EBITDA and revenue results mean the executive actually got a little over 62% of their target payout. That's a pretty good haul. This consists of stock-settled stock appreciation rights and SARs and performance-based restricted stock units, STSUs, and 30% is PSUs, and 30% is PSUs, and 30% is SARs. The company wants people to own the stock, especially leaders, to ensure their interests align with the stockholders. Specifically, the CEO has to own 6 times his salary, and the executives have to own 3 times their salary. Time to hit the numbers in the summary compensation table. This gives you all the different elements of executive pay, as you can see from the table, and consistent with our compensation philosophy discussed above, long-term incentive compensation in the form of equity awards comprises a significant portion of total compensation. Eugene Hall, the CEO, pulled in almost $18.4 million total. That included almost $10.7 million option awards. Craig Safian, the CFO, made about $6.3 million option awards. Craig Safian, the CFO, made about $6.3 million, and so on. Owen Dawkins retired with $4.2 million. Not bad to pull in over $4 million per year. The other compensation part includes perks like car allowance and payments. Those don't add up to be too big compared to everything else. Alright, what happens if things go south? Let's say Mr. Hall gets terminated in the second best way with a double trigger termination, whatever that means. He'd get about 64.7 million as a result. The other Neos would get around $10 million and result. The other Neos would get around $10 million and result. The other Neos would get around $10 million. And one falls and dollars video, we got around $10 million and result. The other Neos would get around $10 million and $16 million. What about the average employee? Well, the median employee was paid about $123,000 and Mr. Hall got $18.3 million. This means Mr. Hall got 148x times that of their employee. That's definitely some food for thought. All right. So looking at the raw numbers here, in 2024, they identified contract value, revenue, and EBITDA as what is used to evaluate the high ups. Okay, so what's the takeaway? Gartner had a pretty good year, even with all the world's issues going on. Executive pay is high, but it is mostly tied to the company's success, which can be a good thing. One notable opportunity they missed is clearly and simply linking executive pay, performance, and the average employee salary. The ratio that I mentioned earlier is not something that Gartner focuses on or seems to track. The main risk is, of course, that their sales slow down. Also, it is a risk that the CEO's very high relative pay is not justified. In my opinion, while they did well, they could be doing much better by making their own employees more involved and make sure they are all in the same boat. It might be good to take a closer look at how they manage their costs and how those costs impact all parties in Gartner. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, please subscribe, like and comment, and let me know what other filings I should review. See you in the next video.